Make the choice to begin anywhere in your life, and the journey has started. And along the way, be inspired. Listen to the stories by joining the president of Howard University, Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, on The Journey.
This is the most important election of our lifetime, and it's important to hear from political analysts who can give us insight on the political issues of the day. Our guest today is a young man who is front and center on the issues in the black community and beyond. Hello, my name is Dr. Wayne Frederick, and my guest today on The Journey is CNN political commentator and the author of My Vanishing Country, Barkari Sellers. So welcome, Mr. Sellers, and I'd like you to start with telling us a bit about where you grew up in Denmark, South Carolina.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the great questions starting at the beginning of my journey. You know, Denmark is a small town where we have 3 stoplights and a blinking light. It's very poor and rural. Growing up, you were related to everyone.
And your parents were in, your father at least was in the education business as well. I would imagine that had a significant influence on you and your view of HBCUs.
Yes. Both my mom and dad. My dad was an HBCU president, so I pray for you every day, Dr. Frederick. You know how thankless your job can be and dealing with your board of trustees. My father was president for 8 years, and he said that's when he got sick of the board and the board got sick of him. And my mom, she taught business communications at South Carolina State. And so I used to remember those games where South Carolina State would play Howard, and you had Sweet Flight White, right? And these just amazing clashes and the bands before and after the games. It was such a cultural experience. And my parents taught me this. They said that you can go to any school you want to go to in the country as long as it's an HBCU. And so I went to Morehouse, my brother went to Morehouse, and my sister went to Xavier. But my father, he actually started his education at Howard University and was roommates with a young man named Stokely Carmichael. And so he ended up finishing, he dropped out of Howard to join SNCC, but he ended up finishing at Shaw. And so this HBCU, it runs through my blood.
And Stokely Carmichael, as you know, grew up in the same place that I grew up in, Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, attended a school there that my grandfather was the principal of, interestingly enough. So
my son is actually named Stokely after Stokely Carmichael, and my sister, and my sister's name is Nosizwe. And that name had a great history with Stokely and his wife in South Africa. And so, I admire the Stokeleys and Julians and Shirley Clark Franklin, who was also a graduate of Howard University. And so, it's just the nexus and the richness of the culture that comes from the HBCU experience.
That's right. What was your public high school experience like in South Carolina at that time?
So I went to a school that was not in the corridor of shame, but it was on the footprint of the corridor of shame. And the corridor of shame, for those who are watching and don't know, is where kids go to school and their heating and air don't work, where their infrastructure is falling apart. Very poor, dilapidated school is where I represented in the South Carolina General Assembly. But my school was big. I went to, at the time, the largest black high school in the state. It's since lost size. It was a very violent high school. We had more school resource officers than guidance counselors. It was overcrowded, but it made me who I was. And I was really young. When I went to 9th grade, I was 12 years old. When I went to Morehouse, I was 16 years old. And if I didn't go to that school, I probably would not have survived in Atlanta at that very, very young age. So I'm very thankful for all of the individuals who poured so much into me from that school. The only thing I wish is that there were more young people who went to school with me who had opportunities, and opportunities to go to college and opportunities to do more, because by no means was I the smartest. I wasn't the most athletic. There were people who were way smarter than me, more athletic than me. They just didn't have the opportunity.
I believe culture is tolerated behavior. And on my campus, I try to remind people of that there are good tolerated behaviors and bad tolerated behavior. From afar, I have admired Morehouse men because you have a tolerated behavior, pride in your black manhood. What about your Morehouse experience you think may have transformed your perspective about your own manhood and your own blackness?
So understanding the lessons that were taught at Morehouse, the one, and this is more of a universal teaching of an HBCU, but one, you can be unapologetically Black. You can have that sense of pride and self. You can recognize the richness of our culture and history. You can also understand the diversity. People ask me all the time, they're like, diversity? You went to a all Black HBCU, all male, and what type of? But we had, we had individuals represented from countries around the world, all 50 states, and had very, very much diverse backgrounds. So that's first. What's unique to Morehouse, though, is the leadership traits that they teach you from when you walk in. They tell us that they place a crown above our head for us to grow into. And while every HBCU can run down a litany of notable alums, we really take pride in the Julian Bonds and the Otis Mosses and the Dr. Kings and those individuals who dedicated themselves to public service. And so, for us at Morehouse, it's that sense of pride of becoming a part of something larger than yourself and always carrying yourself. Now, I appreciate your admiration from afar, because for some, there's an old saying that you can always tell a Morehouse man, you just can't tell them much. And so we have to make sure that pride stays in check as well. But it is a tolerated behavior, one of leadership and one of pride.
And that's true. You can't tell them much, but I have to be honest. I mean, Morehouse men have done lots of great things, and I appreciate from afar that closeness and togetherness. I think it says a lot about where we are as a society as well. I often say that one of our issues is self-hate. I don't think we practice enough self-love, and I don't necessarily mean to ourselves as individuals, but to our community as a whole. And the more that we have an opportunity to come together, which brings me to part of your career, obviously, has been in the legislative arm in South Carolina. And what led to you joining at such a young age, and what about that experience you took away from that, especially in a state like South Carolina?
So, I got the bug when I was working for United States Congressman Jim Clyburn and also Atlanta Mayor Shirley Franklin. I got the job with Shirley because, of course, she was at Howard with my dad, and he was always calling her Shirley Clark. And I'm like, I don't know who that is, Dad, but it was actually her maiden name, and she's been just so awesome in helping me guide me through my political career. And so once you get that bug, most people tell you in politics, you can't get rid of it. Experiencing, the ability to change people's lives every day. The culture at Morehouse taught us that we could go out and run for office, and it didn't matter how old we were, as long as we prioritized, had our ethos, knew what we stood for, treated politics as a science like it truly is. And I went home and realized that my community, it wasn't growing slowly or stagnantly, it was declining. And so I ran against somebody who was 82 years old, who had been in office for 26 years, which was longer than I had been born. And on June 13, 2006, I became the youngest Black elected official in the country. I asked myself very simple questions like, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And I challenge more young people, particularly young Black women, to get involved in the political process. I'm hopeful that Senator Harris will be victorious, but even more so, I hope that she will be somewhat of a beacon for young people of color, showing them that they can make headway in this process, this political process, because our democracy, as you know, is very much participatory.
And on a personal note, on June 13, 2006, my son turned 2, and that was just about a month shy of the birth of my daughter. So I'm now the father of a 16-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter. You have a very personal story that you've been pretty open about in terms of bringing kids into the world and how you see maternal health, especially Black maternal health, as well. Would you share some of that with us?
Yeah, so, my number one political issue is African American female mortality. We discussed that on my podcast, and thank you for you and Dr. Carlisle for lending your time and your expertise. It was a brilliant conversation, truly elevated the discourse. But my heart breaks for Chrissy Teigen today. Chrissy is going through, a great deal, losing her child during birth. We had an amazing pregnancy, and we had an awful birth. But for the fact that we had 3 women of color as our OBGYNs, my wife probably would not be here today. She began to hemorrhage. She lost 7 units of blood while we were learning how to breastfeed twins, which is a whole lot in itself. She passed out. She began to throw up. They kind of tossed the twins to me and the lactation assistant. We threw them in there. I'll never forget it. We threw them in their little cribs that they gave us, and we put them in the wrong crib. That's just how panicky we were. I was yelling for the nurses. They were moving slow as all outdoors. I mean, they just would not move fast. They were like, she's okay, she's okay. Then we pulled back the sheet, and it was just blood everywhere. So I literally just FaceTimed my wife's doctor. She was in our same social circle, member of the Lynx, Jack and Jill, all of those things. And she said, I'm gonna get my girlfriends, which were her coworkers, on the phone. One literally had an 8-year-old in the bed. She left the garage open and told the neighbor to come over and check on her. She got in the car, they ultrasounded my wife and realized that she had a stomach full of blood and she was bleeding out. And that they went in and did what's called a Barkari balloon, which ironically enough, my name being Barkari, a Barkari balloon was just too much on point. And here I am, saying that that college prayer. I don't know if you said it when you were in school. You probably were a much better student than I, but the college prayer is when you have a rough Friday night and Saturday morning, you wake up and you like, dear God, if you get me through this, I'll never do X, Y, and Z again. And so I said that because here I was with these twins and they just gave me formula. And my wife was in a surgery for about 4 or 5 hours. No one was allowed on the floor with me, so it was just me and the twins. It's a feeling that I never wish on anybody. My wife was in ICU for 36 hours, the first 36 hours of my kid's life, doing amazing now. And, my kids are doing great now. My daughter ended up having to have a liver transplant, which was another whole ordeal. But just understanding the healthcare delivery system, the implicit biases from that system, just gives me more motivation to, again, make sure that people have opportunities to live healthy and happy lives, including Black women who are giving birth.
And, maternal mortality is a major issue in the United States, and most people don't recognize that. But we have some cities, including the District of Columbia, where the maternal mortality rate is much higher than some third world countries. And that's something that we have to continue to bring to light, primarily because of Black women who are far more likely to die during birth. So, your bringing that experience out, I think, is important. But the first story I actually heard about you in terms of your personal journey was your daughter's liver transplant, and that's very meaningful to me. My mentor one of my mentors is a surgeon named Clive Callender, who I have said that he single-handedly would have done more for minority transplantation in this country than any other single physician in our lifetime. He's been here at Howard, started an organization called MOTEP to bring about awareness to donor matching and so on in the minority community. And given that aspect of what you went through with your daughter, what are some of your learnings that you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, so our transplant system in this country is broken, fundamentally broken. I was on the floor with a lot of different parents, and we were at Duke University, a phenomenal institution, one of the best transplant centers in the world. And we were walking around the floor, and we were with people who were having, entire bowel and intestinal transplants. I mean, just, my daughter's sitting here. She was on the liver transplant list for 93 days. Every single day she's dying right before your eyes. And we were just looking around at everyone else and what they were going through. And we were like, well, we're blessed that it's just the liver, right? And so we went through this very broken system and got the phone call. There was a young boy who, had passed away, had a liver that was a decent size. They only had to shave a little bit of it. I remember hearing the helicopter land on the top of the hospital when they were bringing his liver down to take out Sadie's old liver. She was diagnosed with biliary atresia, which is a very rare liver disease. It's 1 in 20,000 young people. And then I realized statistics like African Americans are less than 5% of the donor pool. Sadie just made it through her 1 year biopsy with, flying colors. They said her liver has no scarring, no damage, no nothing. It's just perfect. And so now I'm going to be a live donor, liver donor as well, to try to pay it forward. I encourage more people of color to be living donors, to check off, transplant on your driver's license, because you can save so many lives. The young boy who passed away, I believe it was 7 or 8 different people, including his eyes, that he was able to help improve their plight. It truly is the gift of life. My daughter is so healthy, running around, chasing her brother now. We other than taking Tacro every single day, twice a day, like she will for the rest of her life. There's no difference, and it's just a blessing. And again, we have to more people of color need to understand that we are going through this process. We actually started a foundation called the Sadie Ellen Fund at Duke. The reason being is because it sucks, Dr. Frederick, because you got a kid, mostly poor, and people of color. They get a transplant, then they have to go to the Ronald McDonald House, and then they have to get their foods and vegetables from a food pantry. And how are you supposed to? You got to make sure that you're eating right, your vitamins, you're getting your prescriptions, all of these things for the transplant to be successful. And if you're impoverished, they don't even want to give you a transplant because of the lack of success. And I don't want to pick on medical institutions, but that many times you have to have very high success rates for there to be other funding and for you to be reviewed properly, et cetera. And so it's really a catch-22 with a broken system.
Yeah, and we appreciate that. We had a transplant program here at Howard that's now closed down for some of the reasons that you ended there with, but I want to also commend you for telling that story, because I think it's a story that we have to get out. I have sickle cell. I've never had a blood transfusion, but I do PSAs for the American Red Cross as an example, because I think more of us have to participate, and certainly people like myself with sickle cell are the beneficiary of the kind spirit that people like you have, so we appreciate that. Just to switch gears a bit, South Carolina is an interesting state right now in our national discourse for more reasons than one. But I want to start first with an incident that ironically again took place on my birthday. My son's birthday is June 13th and mine is June 17th.
Oh, yeah.
And the attack at the Emmanuel Church is something that I will always remember for a variety of reasons, but one of them is hearing you be interviewed and speak to what occurred, and to see the emotion on your face at that time told a very different story. Tell me, the South Carolina that has lost the Confederate flag, and the South Carolina that we're looking as we go into a presidential election today.
Well, my thesis would probably be, if I was just writing about that then and now, would be that we made progress, but we still have yet a ways to go. That was one of the more painful moments in our state's entire history. 9 people were killed because of the color of their skin. Clemente Pinckney, who was the pastor of that church, was a good friend of mine. In fact, my house seat was in his Senate district, and so we communicated often about the politics of the day. When I was running for lieutenant governor in 2014, my last campaign stop was at his former church, where he was there and he presided over. And we had as you know, we love our fried fish here in South Carolina, so we had a fried whiting in the back of the church. He had this really big voice. Some of the details people don't know, like the straggly white boy walked up to the door. They let him in. They didn't know him from Adam. And he prayed and worshiped with him for an entire hour. And Clem set him not on the other side, but set him right beside him. He was the first person that Dylan Roof shot, and Clem also was the only person who made it to the hospital that night. He was shot in the neck. He made it to the hospital where he subsequently died. His wife was in the church, and his daughter was in the church that night with them. His daughter, just last week, won her class president elections. And so Jennifer was telling us, Jennifer Pinckney, Clem's wife, and posted it on Twitter. And, the whole state, Democrat and Republicans, were cheering for this girl to win this race. It was fascinating, and she won. So, just that legacy, that pain, that struggle, we've come a long way in South Carolina from that moment. And I don't believe Clem's life will be in vain. We're going to have an interesting election night here, where I believe we'll be close and put some more cracks in the glass of progress.
And as you look at that, you have a close race for the Senate seat with an African American as the contender. What do you think that says about the electorate in South Carolina, and how possible you really think it is for that Senate seat to be flipped?
It's tough. I believe it can be done, but it's really, really tough. I think that what we're seeing is just the perfect storm. Even the debate or whatever that was recently that people watched. My daughter was terrified after watching it. I don't know if I'm gonna let her watch the next two, but I just think that it's the perfect convergence of events. Will it be enough? I don't know, because this still is South Carolina. But the fact that we actually have a chance it's just a wild scenario. But also, Dr. Frederick, never thought the Confederate flag would come down, ever. And here we are. So, anything is possible, to quote Kevin Garnett after he won the finals.
Yeah, I watched the debate with my 16-year-old son and 14-year-old daughter, and it was a different kind of civic lesson. One that you're right. I'm not as excited to participate in again, but one that I have to tell you I think was important, because I also think it's important for them to see what can and cannot be, and to be very honest and realistic and pragmatic to some extent about where we are. Now, as you know, we're recruiting young, bright students here who, many of them come to me and they have interest in becoming the next Barkari Sellers, as an example. And as you look at the political landscape in our country today, and yes, we have Senator Harris that may be well on her way, but there's some practical things and practical advice that young people need in terms of watchwords and things that they should still do. And oftentimes, I don't want people to feel that they can skip those in order to get to the next level. What are some of those things you would want the young people to be thinking about and making sure that they double down on?
So, there are a few things. One, you don't have to be any particular major or have any particular degree to go into politics. In fact, people who come from varying backgrounds make even better political figures. But you got to learn how to count, because every election you need 50% plus one vote to win, right? So, politics is about addition and multiplication, not division and subtraction. And that has to be your mind state as you go forward. So that's kind of first. Second thing is you need to figure out who you are and what you stand for. Because if you're someone who kind of blows with the wind, who is somewhat of a jellyfish politically, you won't have much success, and you won't be around long, and you probably get yourself in trouble. You got to figure out what your career is going to be, because if you want to come into politics to make money, then you probably either going to be broke or indicted. So make sure that you have a career. Make sure that you understand what you want to be and what your work ethic and job trajectory looks like. And I think lastly, always dream with your eyes open. Nobody wants an elected official who doesn't have any vision. So be a visionary. Understand, the best example is this, Dr. Frederick. Did you know that you could just take up mailboxes if you were the president of the United States? Because I had no idea that was possible, right? Donald Trump has taught us the power and the will of the White House, because there are things that he's doing that I had no idea were even possible. Like, I literally just saw mailboxes being put on back of trucks. And so I use that as an example because I want people to not necessarily ascribe to be Donald Trump by any stretch, but I do want them to ascribe to see what has not been done yet and figure out how we get there.
So, Barkari, you've written a book, My Vanishing Country. In spite of vanishing being in the title and you walking us through a myriad of issues that you're concerned about, what should we be hopeful for in America today?
So, yeah, just like you, I believe that it's our children who we live for. My twins, 20 months, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and none of them deserve to grow up in the country that we live in today. And so our work is not yet done. I'll give you one example of a very conflicted example. My 15-year-old daughter, after George Floyd, she went out with her girlfriends, put a mask on, all black, had a sign that said Black Lives Matter. They protested, they marched. I loved it, but it also drove me crazy, because here my daughter is 15 years old and she has to have a sign that reaffirms her basic level of humanity. What are we doing? And we need to make sure that we work that much harder to improve the plight of those young people who come behind us.
And as we begin to wrap up, a couple of things that I want to make sure that we touch on. We certainly want to see you here on campus post-pandemic. But being in the middle of the pandemic, it has really ripped the bandage off of a lot of our inequities in the country. What are some of your thoughts about your observations and things that you think you've learned as we see this pandemic unfold?
So for me, I look at Denmark, South Carolina, where I'm from, where in Denmark we don't have potable water in the water system, like a lot of Black and brown communities in this country. We live in a food desert where you can't go 2-3 miles and get fresh fruits and vegetables. The air is somewhat polluted from the manufacturing plants around. The small businesses have been closed, and the plants that were actually good, high-paying jobs have since gone because of NAFTA and CAFTA. And our hospital closed in 2010. So now if you have a heart attack, that's pretty much a death sentence, right? So access to that type of care in most rural areas. But when you look at all of these systemic injustices and then you overlay a pandemic, it's no wonder Black folk are dying at higher rates, at disparate rates. And that just shows you that we have to cure, as you said, rip the Band-Aid off. We have to go in and root out these systemic inequities we have so that people have a basic chance to survive and live. And that's just a part of the vanishing country, but it also shows us where we are with this pandemic.
Usually when I have Howard alum on this program, I end with the question, why Howard? I'm going to be respectful of my Morehouse brother today and ask you the question, why an HBCU today? For those young people who are out there protesting, Black Lives Matter, they want to make a change, why an HBCU?
So I'll do you one better. I actually am answering the question, why Howard today? My 15-year-old, her choices are the University of North Carolina or Howard University. And so, although it's not Spelman, I am answering the why Howard question. She loves your volleyball program. She loves the HBCU experience. The biggest news she got were the 2 kids who you guys stole from Texas A&M to come play volleyball at Howard. So she is so excited, and she has a big cousin who came to Howard and pledged, and she was able to see all of these things, just experiences you may not get at the University of North Carolina. So I'm answering the why Howard question, and if you have some Howard advice and tips, we would greatly take it in our household. I'm trying to beat out her father and my wife, and they're both North Carolina graduates, so it's just me inside.
Well, my daughter is 14. She's a volleyball player, so they may be teammates. So I'll be happy to help sell her on why Howard University.
Your daughter's not going to school where her dad is the president. Now, come on.
No, so that right there might be a definition of where my tenure ends. She'll be entering in 2024. So right there, she might be ending my presidency with that.
Fair enough.
Thanks very much for spending the time with us. Your journey has been absolutely amazing. I've been a fan, and it's been great to watch you from afar. As I said before, I think our community needs a lot more self-love rather than self-hate. There's a lot more we could do together than apart. And certainly, I think you've been one of the people who's been leading. And so it's a great opportunity to share your story with our wider community. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Have a blessed day.
All right. Take care.
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.